webinar. This is the webinar for the applicant orientation for 2024 Continuum of Care and Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program funds from HUD, and also, excitingly, the 2024 CoC Builds Notice of Funding Opportunity funds from HUD. So next slide, please. So here's today's agenda. First, we'll cover the Continuum of Care, which I'll call CoC, and the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program competition. I'll call that YHDP. The HUD details, and then also the local process. And then we'll pause for some question and answer. And after that, we'll get into the CoC Builds competition, which is for development of new permanent supportive housing. Next slide, please. So the overview of the HUD CoC YHDP program. Next, please. For those of you who are not that familiar with this, I'm going to throw out some acronyms that you'll be hearing a lot of. CoC means Continuum of Care, and I'll talk a little bit about what that is. YHDP, I told you what that is. That's the Youth Demonstration Program. It's special funds serving youth experiencing homelessness. HUD, that's the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and that's the agency that releases these funds. And then NOFO, that's just a fancy word, Notice of Funding Opportunity, the HUD Notice of Funding Opportunity. Next slide, please. So Continuum of Care, it really means three things. It's a system for preventing and ending homelessness, and it's a coalition. It's like our CoC coalition. That's the Housing for Health Partnership, which is our CoC group. And then it's a HUD funding program, the HUD Continuum of Care funding program. So, when people say CoC, they might mean any one of those three things or all of them. Next slide, please. We're in the Santa Cruz County Continuum of Care. There's our official name and number, California 508, Watsonville, Santa Cruz City and County CoC. That's what HUD calls us, the HUD name. So our CoC coalition is the Housing for Health Partnership. Our governance board is the Housing for Health Partnership Policy Board. And then we have a lead entity, or otherwise HUD calls it the collaborative applicant, because they submit the consolidated application. It's the County Human Services Department, Housing for Health Division. And not only does it submit the application, but it coordinates and facilitates the Continuum of Care. Submits the application in eSnaps, which is HUD's online system, and then manages the Homeless Management Information System, HMIS, that's another acronym, and the Coordinated Entry System, CES. Next slide, please. It's a multi-step process for the CoC and YHDP funds. HUD releases the NOFO, which they did a couple of weeks back. We as the CoC develop and manage a local process to invite, rate, and rank projects to submit to HUD. And then we, as staff to the CoC, submit the consolidated application to HUD in eSnaps. And that includes the local project applications, which you yourself submit into eSnaps, and then we forward it to HUD. And then when HUD makes grant awards, they'll fund your agency directly. So the CoC is not a pass-through. You don't get the funds from us. You'll get the funds from HUD. Next slide, please. This year, we're looking to, based upon the HUD formula and competitive factors, we're looking to get around hopefully 6.9 million in total funds. And this includes renewal the funds. There's 4.4 million, which is the amount that it takes to renew existing CoC renewals for 1 year and 1.279 million for 1 year of renewals for YHDP projects. And it's important to note with renewals that that's the amount that it takes to renew those projects, but the CoC could decide to reallocate those funds. Like say there's a project not operating well or not spending all of its money, then the CoC does have the authority to reallocate funds from renewal projects without losing any of those funds for the CoC. So new CoC housing bonus projects, 689,000. So that's a new housing opportunity. And I'll talk a bit more about that. There's also a domestic violence bonus project opportunity. Again, that's a bit smaller, 187,000. And then a CoC planning grant. Next slide, please. So what are some important changes this year? We are going to have a 2-year NOFA. Every year people complain about why does HUD do this every year? Well, they've managed to do it to a 2-year this time. Kind of happy about that. And another cool thing is cost of living adjustments, COLAs for supportive services and HMIS. HUD has kind of heard agencies' complaints about the fact that their services budgets never go up and they can't pay staff more. And HUD realizes, how do you retain staff when it's like that? And then YHDP projects don't have to compete this year, whether or not they're renewal or replacement projects. So what that means is you have to submit the application to HUD and eSNAPs by the deadline of September 27th, but you do not have to submit the local competitive project application that we use to rate and rank projects. YHDP projects are non-competitive. They won't be rated or ranked. You just submit them in eSNAPs and then HUD funds them. So I hope you're happy about that. YHDP projects can be reallocated this year, which you couldn't do in previous years. And then, and the same is true actually with DV bonus projects that were awarded in previous years. So like if there was a DV bonus project that was awarded 2 years ago, CoC could decide in theory to reallocate some or all of those funds. But it would have to be for the same population. It would have to be a 100% DV bonus project that it got reallocated to. And then the last major change is that Tier 1 is smaller, only 90% of the annual renewal demand, which is a bit less than last year. And I'll talk a bit more about what that means. Next slide. So the 2-year NOFO, so we as the CoC, we write the CoC narrative and submit it. We only have to do that once in 2024, and it will cover, we don't have to submit it in 25. That will be covered by the 2024 CoC narrative. And that's the document that we as the CoC staff compile. It's all about the strategies and priorities and needs of our CoC, and it's used by HUD as the basis for scoring. So we only have to do that in 2024. Then 2024 project applications, those of you who applied this year and received 1 year of funding don't need to reapply next year. You would be automatically re-awarded 1 year of funds in 2025. So those of you who are going to be funded this year, next year, it'll be a breeze. Some projects will have to apply in 2025. The deadline will be August 29th. So those will be any project like it could be any new projects for if, Congress creates new funding opportunities through the appropriations process, or if the CoC decides to reallocate some of those 2025 funds, then we'd have to go in there. Applicants would have to go in and submit applications in eSNAPs by August 29th, 2025. But let's forget about that for now because that's a year away. Next slide. So I want to get back into talking a bit more about the project ranking and tiering. So, we as the CoC have to competitively rank continuum of care projects into 2 tiers. And again, not YHDP projects this year. So tier 1 is 90% of the entire renewal amount, which is a little over 4 million. So we rank projects in tier 1. So the first, if you imagine tier 1 being at $4 million, like in a bucket, the first project, might be 500,000, next one another 500,000, next one, and so on, until you hit the $4 million line, at which point tier 1 is full. So, that's why the 90% is important, because it makes the tier 1's a little smaller in terms of the share of our renewal amounts than last year. So those tier 1 projects, if we put a project in tier 1, it means that it's almost virtually certain to be funded. HUD goes ahead and funds those, as long as they don't find some kind of a problem with it. Tier 2 projects are ranked below tier 1. So once we hit the tier 1 line, say we've hit that 4 million, and then we're continuing to rank projects, those go to what's called tier 2. And that's tier 2 is defined by really the difference between tier 1 and the maximum possible amount of projects that we can include, or that could possibly be funded. So those tier 2 projects, they're competitively scored by HUD, and typically, some tier 2 projects just don't get funded because there's not enough funds for them all. That's why they're competitive. Another thing to point out here in terms of this ranking and tiering, we're not automatically ranking renewal projects high. There's no guarantee for renewal projects. They can be ranked in tier 1 or they could be ranked in tier 2. And the same is true for new projects that, they could be in tier 1, they could be in tier 2. It really depends upon how our governance board, the H4HP policy board, views the relative need, performance, and priorities for different project types. So next slide, please. So what types of projects are eligible? HUD kind of controls this. It's not like an open season on any type of homeless project that you want. CoC renewal projects of all types are eligible. When we say CoC renewals, we mean grants that have a contract expiring in calendar year 2025. That's January 1st through December 31st, 2025. So those grants which expire next year, they have to be applying for renewal this year so that they'll get their funds next year. But if you're not expiring in 2025, if you expired in 2024, oops, you're too late. Or if you expire in 2026, you don't apply until next year. So what are the eligible new project types that we're looking at? So the CoC bonus and or reallocation grants, like if the board decides to reallocate funds, would go to permanent supportive housing, targeting chronically homeless persons or persons who meet the dedicated plus population definition. I'll show you what that is a little bit later. And then rapid rehousing programs would be eligible for new project funds, and joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing projects would also be eligible. For the domestic violence bonus, those projects must serve 100% people who are fleeing or attempting to flee violence, as defined by the HUD rule that defines domestic violence, paragraph 4 of the homeless definition. It deals with domestic violence. So those projects can be rapid rehousing, transitional housing with rapid rehousing. It's, I'll talk more about what that joint component is. And then coordinated entry system focused on domestic violence, but only for the lead provider. I don't think we're applying for that this year. Next slide, please. So the eligible YHDP project types, all YHDP renewals that are expiring in calendar 2025. And then new project types. Now, any YHDP project can actually has the flexibility to just replace its existing. If you decide that it's an innovative program. So if you decide what you're doing now isn't working that well, you have the ability to just simply not apply for that renewal, and in its place apply for a replacement project, which is their fancy name for a YHDP new project. So there's a listing here of the types of replacement projects that you could apply for. It's more extensive than the continuum of care. So things like host homes or shared housing or crisis residential transitional housing. Also, in general, YHDP projects can benefit from numerous flexibilities that are not eligible to regular CoC projects. So those are listed in our solicitation of applications, policies, and procedures document, which you'll find on the website, which lists all these great things you could possibly ask HUD to do. Things like longer terms for rapid rehousing or flexibility in lease requirements and so on. Next slide, please. So things that are not eligible, you cannot apply for, just not eligible. Emergency shelter, homeless prevention projects, new transitional housing only, new supportive services only project, except for coordinated entry or YHDP supportive services only projects, and any projects that do not serve persons experiencing homelessness as defined by HUD are just simply not eligible. Next slide. So a little bit more about these renewals. Only the entity with a grant agreement can apply for a renewal. So if you're in the process of transferring your grant to a new recipient, whoever, it's the entity that has the grant right now who has to apply. And if you haven't completed the transfer, you're just going to have to wait until after the grant comes through. Then you can only ask for the amount that's listed in the 2024 grant inventory worksheet. So, the grant inventory worksheet, we're going to post that on the website. We haven't done that yet, but it lists the amount that you are eligible to apply, that each project is eligible to apply for. So if it says you can apply for $425,000, then that's what you apply for, no more than that. And the renewals will be eligible for FMR increases for like rental assistance and leasing, if the FMRs go up, and also for COLAs, as I said before. But those, you don't include those increases in your application. HUD applies then after they give out awards. So just apply for what's in the grant inventory worksheet, and then you'll be looking to receive. When you receive an award, it will include any FMR increases in COLAs above what you applied for. You cannot modify your project through the grant application process. You can't suddenly say, well, I'm a renewal project, but I don't really like this. I'm going to change it in a bunch of different ways. You can't do that. That would make it into a new project, and that would mean you're giving up the renewal, and you don't want to do that unless you want a new project. So, and you can only request 1 year of funds. And then if you have multiple renewal projects of the same type, say they're like, you have more than one rapid rehousing project, then you can ask HUD to consolidate them into a single grant. And that's, some of our agencies have done that. It's great. So, so that's something you can do within the application process itself. Next slide, please. Creating new projects. So you can create a standalone project, which is, you just decide, I want to create this new project of an eligible type, like permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless persons. Or say you already have a renewal grant, a permanent supportive housing program that already serves chronically homeless people, and you just want to expand that by adding some new units and serving more people, then you could apply for an expansion grant rather than a standalone grant. And that would mean you apply for the renewal, and then you submit a second application, which is a new project application, in which you say we want to expand that renewal, and you identify how many new units and how many more people you'll be serving. So transition grants is another way to create a new project. So some renewal applicants may have a project that they think isn't fully meeting their needs, and they want to change it, but they want 1 year to make all of the changes necessary. They can apply, they can give up their renewal grant and submit a transition application. So they might say they're moving from just rapid rehousing to rapid rehousing and transitional housing joint component. They would have 1 year to do that. And by the end of that year, then the new project would have to be fully 100% operational. Next slide, please. So a little bit more here about the DV bonus. So in Santa Cruz County, the formula amount for us is $187,000. And so I think we're looking for one project. Theoretically, we could fund more than one. There's not a cap on, actually there's a floor, $50,000 is the minimum project, but we think it's more cost effective to look for one project for $187,000 for 1 year. And 100% DV population as defined by category 4. You can use the expansion process, so it can be a standalone project or an expansion project. And you can expand a project which was previously funded by a DV bonus in past, or you could expand a non-DV bonus project, but the expansion portion would have to be set aside 100% for people fleeing or attempting to flee DV. And when you apply for the DV bonus, you'll need to coordinate with us, because you'll have to apply, submit the application, the new DV bonus project application, but you will also need to answer the competitive questions that are in the CoC narrative that I was talking about earlier. So what that means is you'll have to coordinate with our staff to answer those, to find those scoring questions and to provide answers for them. And those answers really will be the key factor in whether or not we get a DV bonus project. So they should be good answers. I should note that it's complicated the way HUD selects them. HUD might not select the project with DV bonus funds. If they pass it over for DV bonus funds because it didn't score high enough, it might still get funded by regular CoC funds if it's ranked high enough by the continuum of care. So we as the continuum of care will look closely at that to make sure we fully understand the implications of how we rank those projects. Next slide, please. So more about the YHDP replacement. I don't know if there's more to say about this. Actually, you can replace your project, but the replacement project can also be used to consolidate multiple YHDP projects or to expand a YHDP project using funds that the CoC reallocates from other YHDP projects. I don't think we're going to do that, but there is that authority to reallocate YHDP funds and expand another project. So it's just the rules of the game have changed a little bit this year. New slide, please. So permanent supportive housing, for those of you interested in applying for that. So it's permanent housing with an indefinite tenant lease. It has leasing or rental assistance funds paired with services aimed at housing stability. And the household has to have one or more persons with a disability. That's a HUD requirement for PSH is, it's got to serve a household with a disability. And it must follow a housing first model, which seeks to minimize barriers to the housing, to entry into the housing, and minimize barriers to remaining in the housing. So things like sobriety or, criminal record and stuff, the project should really be looking to screen people in rather than out. Then it can be single site or scattered site. You can use leasing funds or rental assistance funds to pay for the housing. If you have other sources, you don't actually have to put funds into leasing or rental assistance, but we do highly encourage rental assistance especially. And then it's got to meet rent reasonableness standards. Tenants pay no more than 30% of income. They don't have to pay anything if you don't want them to. And it's got to meet habitability standards, et cetera. There are a lot of requirements. Next slide, please. So we're targeting PSH to chronically homeless persons or the dedicated plus population. So chronic homelessness, that's people who are homeless, an individual or a family with a disability living on the street or in a shelter, and they've been homeless for at least 1 year or 4 times in the past 3 years, with the combined episodes of at least 1 year. So that's it in a nutshell what chronic homeless is. Dedicated plus, a few years ago, HUD realized that chronically homeless was just too narrow a definition to meet every need that really is out there. The people who are super needy for PSH. So, so they created dedicated plus, which is a bit more flexible. It'll serve some people who wouldn't actually qualify for chronically homeless. I'm not going to read it through. You can look at it yourself. It's in the documentation that we've got up on the website, and it's here. So next slide, please. Rapid rehousing. So this is a program model that is really focused on people who are homeless, but they need housing search and relocation assistance, and they might need some shorter medium-term rental assistance, maybe some other financial assistance like security deposit or move-in costs in order to enable them to move into permanent housing. But they're on track to becoming permanently housed, and they're moving forward in that direction. And you think they will become self-sufficient on their own. You'll taper the rental assistance will end, and they will keep the lease and be able to maintain the housing. So it's time limited up to 24 months. Scattered site, housing first. The participants secures and leases their own housing, but often with help in finding the housing and negotiating with the landlord. And they use tenant-based rental assistance for that temporary rental assistance up to 24 months. And then they receive, you're regularly case managing the person, but focused on housing search to secure the unit. And then also housing stabilization services, like just, ongoing check-ins once they're in the housing to make sure they remain stably housed. New slide. Now that transitional housing, rapid rehousing component. So in this one, HUD decided to join two different program types together into a single project. Transitional housing, which is singular site or scattered site units in which participants can stay up to 24 months, after which they exit to their own housing. And during the time they're in transitional housing, they're receiving supportive services, helping them to become more self-sufficient. And then rapid rehousing. So, what we're really talking about is people who, you have someone who goes into transitional housing and then they find their own unit, and you can move them into their own unit and continue giving them rapid rehousing. The total limit for the transitional and rapid rehousing is 24 months. So it's not like you get 24 months and 24 months. It's total 20. So you might have them in transitional housing for 12 months and in rapid rehousing for 12 months. And you also have to be able to offer them either one. They don't have to take both, or if the client walks in and they say, I only want rapid rehousing, I don't want the transitional housing, you have to offer that. That's a requirement. Next slide, please. When you apply for a new project with rental assistance, you would have to ask for the full FMR. And so that's loaded into eSNAPs. You'll see that it's already included in the HUD application. So and then but expect all of those items to be adjusted when HUD awards the grant if the FMR goes up. And then if you have a subrecipient, like you have a partner in the project that is receiving HUD funds, you have to share 50% of any project admin funds that you're receiving. Then you have to meet HUD timeliness standards, and then you should apply for only 1 year. Even though a new project can apply for more than 1 year, according to the HUD rules, it makes more sense financially to apply for 1 year. Because say you apply for $500,000 for 1 year. Next year, you will apply to renew $500,000 in year 2. You get that in year 2, $500,000. Year 3, $500,000, not to mention the FMR increases in COLAs. But if you apply for $500,000 for 5 years, you only get $100,000 per year. So at the end of 5 years, you apply for a 1-year renewal, and it's only $100,000. So you can see why it makes sense to apply just for 1 year and then renew it every year. Next slide. Match requirements are 25%. Cash or in kind, except for leasing. Leasing has no match requirement. So cash match is funds from any other source except CoC funds that you use for project activities. And you have to spend it on things that that you could pay for that would be eligible for HUD CoC funds if you were spending CoC funds for the thing. So it's got to be paid for on the project and CoC eligible. In-kind matches could be property, equipment, or services. You need or third-party services. There has to be an MOU with the third party. The value of the services have to be basically, in accordance with the local market for that particular type of service. You have to document any type of match. So with cash match or some types of in-kind match, you need a match commitment letter, promising to HUD that you will provide that match. And if you have third-party services, then you need an MOU. That's a requirement. You have to provide, and so these are things that are evidence of match that you have to provide to HUD at the time they ask for it. And looking down into the future, if you get the grant, then the match must be tracked and spent along with the CoC funds. So it really makes sense in your spreadsheets and your spending reports and so on that you're including match, not just your CoC budget categories, but your match, and you're demonstrating that you're spending it as you go along. Next slide. So, with the eligible project types like rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing, you can spend money on different budget categories. Leasing, it's eligible for some program types. It's money to lease units or structures. Rental assistance could be tenant-based, sponsor-based, project-based. Project-based meaning it's attached to the building, to the unit. It doesn't go with the tenant. It can be short-term, medium-term, or long-term. If it's permanent supportive housing, then it's long-term. It has to be, then it's unlimited. If it's rapid rehousing, then you're looking at 3-month or 4 to 24-month rental assistance. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the differences between leasing and rental assistance as we go through this a little bit more. Next slide. Here's some key differences. We found that people don't really understand the differences, but they're two different things. They seem similar, but they're different. Leasing, the focus on leasing is the property. You lease the property. The focus of rental assistance is on the participant. You give the participant rental assistance. With leasing, the applicant leases directly from the landlord and might sublease it to the participant. In the case of rental assistant, the participant leases directly from the landlord, and the applicant has a separate rental payment agreement with the landlord. Leasing often has environmental clearance requirements, federal and environmental clearance requirements, NEPA, but not often with rental assistance. There's some slight difference in other eligible costs, like both of them allow security deposits, first and last month rent, and staff costs. But staff costs for rental assistance activities are different from leasing, because with rental assistance, you have to do things like habitability inspections and some other things like that. And then also you can use rental assistance for one-time property damages equal to 1 month of rent. Now that's only one time per tenant. If they, you can't keep giving somebody, let a tenant damage property and then keep, paying landlords for that. Just one time. Then the rent limits are different. With leasing, you may not exceed the FMR. And that's, I don't know if I explained what FMR is. It's the fair market rate or rent that HUD determines every year for every jurisdiction in the country. Like Santa Cruz County has very high FMRs. Usually goes up every year. So you cannot exceed the HUD posted FMR. And you also you cannot exceed rent reasonableness. So there's a process for determining reasonable rents in your community. Sometimes those are higher than the FMR, sometimes they're lower. But so in this case, if the rent reasonableness was lower than the FMR, then that would be the most you could charge. It would be below the FMR. With rental assistance, it's a bit different. You may exceed the FMR, but you may not exceed rent reasonableness. So in this case, if rent reasonableness is higher than the FMR, like say, for example, if rent reasonableness is $2,500 per month, but the FMR is $2,000 per month, then you may charge $2,500 per month with rental assistance. But that's not true with leasing. And then with utilities in leasing projects can be paid out of an operating budget. With rental assistance, you cannot pay for utilities at all. You cannot have an operating budget. And if the rent doesn't cover the utilities, then the tenant has to pay for them separately. Next slide. Supportive services. Most of our projects have some supportive services. So here's a listing of the types of services. It's like assessments or case management or whatever, housing search, legal services, transportation, health services, etc. So services pays for salary and benefits of staff who are directly providing services, and materials and supplies in providing services. Next slide. Operating costs, some day-to-day operating costs for certain, but again, not if you have rental assistance, you can't have operating. And you can't combine rental assistance and leasing either, except for in transitional housing and rapid rehousing, combined transitional and rapid rehousing projects. Next slide. HMIS costs, the cost that you have for contributing data to the HMIS or to a comparable database if you're a victim services agency. And then project admin, which is capped at 10%. And it's important to remember these are direct admin costs for administering the project, costs you would have only because you have this project. It's not indirect costs or other just general agency overhead costs that you would have even if you didn't have this project. You can't charge those here. You could charge them to an indirect costs, but not for project admin. Next slide. So we just have this to show there are a number of other requirements that a project would have to meet. Your client's data must be entered into HMIS or a comparable database. You must participate in coordinated entry, which means that that's the only referral source for your clients. So, clients, that enter this housing come through, are assessed by the coordinated entry system and are prioritized for your unit. Then you've got housing first compliance, and you have demonstrated financial capacity, record keeping requirements, housing quality standards, FMRs, rent reasonableness, etc. Next slide. eSNAPs. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that here. You're better off looking at HUD's own eSNAPs guidance materials, but suffice it to say that CoC projects you submit, but you're going to submit a local application to us for rating and ranking, and then you're also at the same time submitting a separate application to HUD in eSNAPs. YHDP projects only have to submit the eSNAPs application. So there's extensive information on HUD's website about eSNAPs, how to use it, how to register for it, how to register your agency, how to create a project and complete a project. There's a link right there for directly accessing eSNAPs. To use eSNAPs, you have to have a unique ID, and a federal unique ID, and an up-to-date SAM registration. That's a federal, contractor registration system number or registration system. Next slide, please. So in essence, what you do with eSnaps is first, all right, I'm a user. I go in there and I create a user profile. And so I get a username and password. So now that I've got that, I say, all right, I'm going to register my agency as an applicant. So you go in and you fill out a project applicant profile. So that's done. Then you say, all right, my agency wants to apply for a grant. So you go in there and there are a bunch of different grant opportunities in eSnaps. It could be like renewal grant opportunity or new project grant opportunity or DV bonus opportunity. And you register for that, and then you fill out and submit a project application form for each project. And then you provide whatever attachments that they've got embedded in there. And I am available to help you out with eSnaps. I provide technical assistance. You can email me. If you want to set up an appointment to talk, we should do that via email, because I'm actually going to be out of the country. So I'm going to be in a different time zone for the next month. So it's better we set up a time that works for both of us. I'll be 9 hours ahead of you, so think about that. And also keep in mind that once you have a complete eSnaps application later in the process, toward the time we submit the applications, I will conduct a thorough technical review to make sure, number one, you're not saying anything that makes your project not eligible for HUD funds or that would make you not competitive for HUD funds, and to make sure that you apply for the right amount of money, that your budget's correct, that all the information is consistent and persuasive within the application. So some of you have been through this nitpicky technical review process, but we'll be doing it again. Next slide. So I want to quickly go through the local process. Next slide, because up until now, I was really talking about the HUD requirements. So this is our Housing for Health Partnership process. So we rate and rank projects using objective criteria, and we rate and rank the projects in a fair, objective, non-conflicted way. Our criteria use performance measures, and we're open and transparent. And the H4H division staffs the process for the partnership. Next slide. Here are the types of projects that we're prioritizing locally that our policy board has determined are the highest priority projects for our community at this time. So all of our renewals, if they're well performing and still needed. I know that's kind of general, but well performing could mean that they're spending all their funds, that they're serving as many clients as they say they would, that they're meeting the performance objectives that they set out. Not so well performing means they spent maybe half their funds, or could be more than that, but or that they're just not serving the clients, or they've leased half the number of units that they thought they would. So it could be a lot of different things like that. So new CoC bonus and reallocation projects of the eligible types that we talked about before, those are all of them are prioritized. We're also incentivizing projects which identify immigrants and persons with justice system involvement as an eligible subpopulation. It doesn't have to be the only group that you serve, but you identify them as eligible for your PSH, rapid rehousing, or TH and rapid rehousing project. So this gives them an opportunity to get housing where they might not be able to qualify for, say, housing authority units because of their immigrant status or their particular, a type of conviction they might have. So we want to provide, an opportunity for housing for everyone who's homeless, not just, some people. All eligible YHDP replacement projects and all DV bonus projects, except for the coordinated entry, we're not prioritizing that. Next slide. Just a reminder that there's a potential for reallocation. What reallocation really means is where the CoC uses its authority to take some or all of the funds from one or more renewal project and allocating those funds to one or more new projects. So it's very flexible in that sense. And every year, HUD requires us to review all renewal grants and determine if they're still performing, spending, obsolete or ineffective, or if some new approach would better reduce homelessness. So yeah, next slide, please. The local process steps. The deadline is September 27th to submit the local application. The non-conflicted funding review committee, which was just appointed by the policy board, will review and score your applications. They will hear project presentations and make recommendations to the policy board on which projects to approve and where to rank them, what the relative priority is, as HUD says. This year, we're asking all projects to present in person. It's optional, but it will be scored, so I suggest you show up. We will provide each agency with a half-an-hour time slot. We'll coordinate with you between now and then to identify a slot that works for you, and could be on the 8th or the 9th. And yeah, so we'll then the policy board on October 15th will make final decisions. We'll send you a letter on October 15th notifying you of what the decision is. And then there's an appeals period through October 23rd for projects that were denied, ranked in tier 2 or had funds reduced. Next slide. Our rating criteria that we use. You'll see on the website that we have posted the project scoring tools for new and renewal projects. They give you a lot more detail in how the review committee looks at and scores project type, chronic homelessness or DV focus, or performance, or coordinated entry, referral acceptance, all of these categories. They each have a certain number of points, and the scoring tool lists the points and shows you how sub-points under each category are determined. So if you really look at those scoring tools carefully, you can get a very good sense of what are the exact factors that will be used to objectively score your project. They include, for renewal projects, APR data. So we'll be looking at performance, HUD performance standards, and our local CoC performance standards using your most recently completed APR, which for a new renewal project you won't have. So you just say, not applicable, we're a new project. You won't be penalized for that if you're a new APR who does not have 1 year of APR data. Next slide. Here's more detail on the timeline. I think we've covered the most important factors for you guys here. The HUD deadline is, that the drop date for us to submit the community consolidated application is October 30th. We'll probably submit it at least 2 days ahead of that, though. Next slide. The local project application forms, again, they're posted on the website. you make sure you use the right form. Every year someone uses the wrong form. Sometimes people use last year's form, which would be wrong because last year's form doesn't have all of the questions that this year has. There are separate forms for new and renewal projects. Do not complete a renewal project form if you have a new project, because you won't get all the right questions. Answer the questions that are applicable for your project. Like some performance questions, for example, are not applicable to a coordinated entry project. There are new narrative questions this year regarding prior experience. Some of you who have done this before, you'll be surprised about the new narrative questions. They're very different from what you've seen before. So we're asking for, like relatively brief narratives on all of these categories: priority, population, program design, coordinated entry, housing first, and equity, to really get a sense of how you handle those issues. The funding review committee hasn't really been able to get a good eye into your project from the way we did the forms before, the application forms. So this will help them understand your project a little bit better, but it will require some more narrative on your part, a little bit more time. Next slide, please. And here's where you find the local materials. The HUD CoC material. It says CoC builds, but that's incorrect. It's the HUD CoC and YHDP competition, and then there's my email address. So I'm going to stop here and see if we have any questions. I'm going to open this up. And I'm sorry I haven't been able to follow questions in the chat because I've been talking the whole time.
There are no questions in the chat.
Oh, great. Yeah.
I think we had one question.
Sure.
We were wondering if the in-person presentations are for non-YHDP grants.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very good point. Since the YHDP projects are not competitive this year, they do not have to give presentations. The funding review committee won't be reviewing those applications, and they won't need to see an in-person presentation.
Right. And if can we apply for one of those other grants like transitional housing outside of our YHDP grant, or do they have to be connected and serving the same age group?
You could always apply for a CoC bonus application, and you're allowed to serve youth, target youth as a population.
Are we allowed to target adults with any of those funds? I think I sort of asked that before, but
you could target adults, but not with YHDP funds.
Right. Yeah.
Now, but a CoC project, you could not expand a YHDP project with CoC funds.
Okay. Yeah. We kind we have the YHDP operating basically out of a separate group than the adult group. So
yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
I think Iman had his hand up.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Thinking about my specific projects. One question is whether the YHDP funding can be layered with other units in existing projects that already have a set aside for youth through like HCD funding. So can this be combined to provide like additional service funding for units already set aside for like transition age youth? And or would it require new units in a project to be established or created with a target to youth? And can it be for an existing project that's underway, or is this more suited to like a new project that is coming online?
There's a lot in there. So wait, which agency are you with?
I'm an affordable housing developer with Novin Development.
Oh, okay, right. So you're not eligible to apply for YHDP funds because only current that's only open to current YHDP applicants.
Tony, can I
Yeah.
completely agree with that. And Amanda, your question, it's possible, looking at the list of current recipients that Tony probably talked about earlier, you could create a partnership with one of those existing recipients where you pair up like our youth rapid rehousing program with units at your property, where they're helping, and that bumps up against kind of fair housing selection issues, but there might be possibilities of some kind of partnerships with an existing grantee.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And what about through like Abode or one of our service providers, Insight, or would they be able to apply, or would they have also been a previous recipient?
I mean, they would have to be a previous recipient, or like if the CoC could reallocate YHDP funds to a new recipient if they thought that was necessary. But that I don't think that's happening. So, and that doesn't really answer your question anyway. I'm just kind of thinking about it's actually possible with the grants.
Money mentioned this just a second ago that there's the YHDP funds, and there's no opportunity for new projects, but there is the new bonus project in the general population bucket. So you can apply for a youth specific population in the general bucket.
Okay.
But that can't be layered with YHDP because it's treated as separate funding.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
And also, it wouldn't have the same level of flexibility that a YHDP project has, but it's still plenty flexible to serve youth. Any other questions?
David had his hand up, but I don't. David, do you have a question?
You there, David?
Yeah, I had a question, and then I deleted it because I think I found the answer
Oh, cool.
in the slide, so no need to ask that. I do have one other question though, is where will the location be when we have to meet in person?
I think it's going to be at the library in Capitola.
Okay, thank you.
But we'll confirm that. We will let everybody, we'll be in touch with all of the applicants to let you know exactly where it's going to be and what the time schedule is and what your particular presentation slot will be within that schedule. To the extent we can, we'll work with you. If a particular time doesn't work, we'll want to know and try to get you into another slot. And also on that, yesterday a question came up about that, like who should be there. It should be, someone who's very knowledgeable about your grant. At least a person like that, and it could be more than one person to, speak about different aspects. And it's helpful to have a program person who really understands the project and the clients and can give a flavor of that for the panelists, the review committee panelists, and the important thing will be to answer questions. Those review committee members will have read your applications, but those might have triggered, thoughts and questions. So that they'll be ready to ask those questions. So next. Go ahead.
Should finance be at the in-person?
No, I don't think so. It's possible there could be a question about the budget, but probably not at the level that would require finance.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah. All right. If there aren't any more questions, we can move on to the CoC builds.
There's one question about the PowerPoint. We should get the PowerPoint from today up on the website by tomorrow.
Yep, great. Unless I'm not seeing any other questions. So why don't we move on then? And next slide, please. Thank you, Vanessa. Let's move that forward. Yeah, so the CoC Builds program competition. How much time do I have, Robert? I don't have a clock in front of me here.
We've got about 40 minutes, 45 minutes.
Okay, try to move
yeah.
quickly. Next slide. There's a new opportunity this year. HUD released a special NOFO CoC Builds competitively available one-time funds, $175 million nationally for the development of new permanent supportive housing. That's the only project type for individuals and families experiencing homelessness where they have a disability. And some of the money set aside for small states, $65 million. And most CoCs can submit only one application. So we are only looking for one application. HUD only allows us to submit one. HUD expects 25 awards nationally that will be 1 million to 10 million. And it's a kind of a thing like Project Home Key, for those of you familiar with that. What HUD's really promoting is adaptive reuse of existing buildings such as motels or office buildings. And one of the ways they're doing this is if you're asking for money to build something brand new rather than rehabilitate a motel, then you have to answer a lot more questions. So new slide, please. And I'll talk a little bit more later about what those questions are. The funds available, we're looking for a project for the maximum amount of 5 million. We would like to maximize that. The more money, we'd like to get as much as possible for one project, which adds new units of PSH. And the one-time funds are for, it could be new construction, acquisition, or rehab. Could be adaptive reuse, as I was saying, or it could be set aside units within an existing program or an existing development, but the set aside units would have to, clearly and strictly meet the program requirements for these funds, serve the population that's targeted by these funds. In addition, no more than 20% of the award could be used for other CoC eligible activities for permanent supportive housing, which include project-based rental assistance, supportive services, and operating costs. So 20% of 5 million is 1 million. And 10% can be used for project admin, which is 500,000. So we are encouraging projects to maximize project-based rental assistance. We have a shortage of rental assistance in Santa Cruz County. And not only that, those funds will almost certainly, HUD has not come out and said yes, certainly, but they will most likely be renewable annually. So that adds to our CoC's renewal base every year. It grows the amount of funding that we're able to apply for year in and year out through the continuum of care, the regular continuum of care, NOFA. So we want to do that. Next slide, please. It cannot be used for new construction, acquisition, or rehab of existing permanent supportive housing or affordable housing that's not new permanent supportive housing. Just general affordable housing, it can't be used for that. It can't be used for emergency shelter, transitional housing, or sober living environments, or any other form of housing that's not PSH. And it cannot be used for a PSH project that does not include construction, acquisition, or rehabilitation. So it's about new development. Next slide. These are HUD's goals. I don't think I'll go through those. Just, you can look at them yourselves. Eligible applicants. So if you're a nonprofit, a public housing authority, a state, a county, a city, or a township, or a tribe, you can apply for funds. But keep in mind that only the collaborative applicant, which is the county H4H division, can actually submit the application. So you fill out the application that the county submits. So what this means in grants.gov. So what this means is coordination with the H4H division, close coordination to make sure that, you know, all of the materials for this, you know, complicated government application are all together, and that H4H can compile them and submit them in grants.gov. Next slide. And the participants who are eligible, I already touched on, you know, individuals and families with a disability who are homeless. And supportive services designed to meet the needs of program participants must be available. Next slide. So more about the eligible budget activities. 100% of the funds could, in theory, be used for acquisition, the cost to purchase real property for the PSH. Rehabilitation funds can be used to pay for up to 100% of the cost of rehabbing a motel or other structure to provide PSH, including cost-effective energy measures or bringing the facility up to health and safety standards. You may not rehab leased property. You have to own the property. Next slide. And then new construction, up to 100% of the cost to build new PSH, including new structures or adding on to an existing structure where you increase the floor area by 100% or more, and the cost of land associated with that construction. Now, here's where I said before that HUDs would prefer it be rehab, but it doesn't have to be rehab, but you will have to answer questions demonstrating that the cost of new construction are substantially less than the cost of rehab, or that there's simply a lack of available appropriate units that could be rehabilitated at a cost less than new construction. So you have to kind of jump through those hoops, those question hoops. And again, you cannot have new construction on leased property. Next slide. I should say, I forgot to include in there, there's a 15-year use agreement that you would have to sign. So, you know, once you spend these monies on development of new permanent supportive housing, it's got to remain that for 15 years at a minimum. So more about the budget. So we are encouraging using 20% on project-based rental assistance. This is, so, you know, this helps pay, you know, the cost of their occupying the unit. Any extra funds could cover damages or rent increases or serve additional people. With project-based rental assistance, there has to be a lease between the participant and the landowner, the landlord. Operating costs could be used, but if there's project-based rental assistance. There's never operating costs with rental assistance. Next slide. And supportive services are eligible as part of that 20%. I already covered this, so let's just skip over this slide. And then project admin at 10%. Cash match requirement is 25% cash or in kind, as we talked about before. Match must be used for costs that would have been eligible if paid for by CoC funds. Next slide. Grants can be 2, 3, or 4 or 5 years. Projects have to have site control by the time you execute the grant agreement. You have to execute the grant agreement by September 1st, 2025. And you have to have a completed environmental review before awarded funds can be drawn. And then you have to meet timeliness, HUD timeliness standards for new construction or rehabilitation activities. If anyone has any questions about what those are, I can answer them, but otherwise let's move on right now. So there are a lot of other requirements. You will enter client data into HMIS. Clients referred to the housing must come through coordinated entry. You must comply with Housing First. The application rewards through points leveraging other housing resources. You have to comply with VAWA. Section 3 compliance, that's giving jobs to people who are low income, and registration requirements, and affirmatively furthering fair housing. You just wanted to put these out there just to show that you should look into what the other HUD requirements are and make sure that you can meet them. Next slide. So let's look at the local process. Next slide. So what we're looking at is a two-step application process. Number one, we as the CoC solicit and evaluate local applications, and then the policy board selects one. We're only looking for one project, so it'll be pretty competitive. And then the selected applicant completes the HUD application, and the CoC collaborative applicant, that's the H4H division, submits the application in grants.gov. And CoC Builds is not using eSnaps like most continuum of care applications. For whatever reason, HUD does not want to use eSnaps for this. It's going to be in grants.gov, which is a different ball of wax. I should say, as project applicants, don't go into and fill out a grants.gov application. You will not have to do that. The county does. You can go into grants.gov to look at all the application materials, that the budget form, the attachments and things like that. We'll work with you on those, but don't register and complete the application. Just to be clear, what we want you to do is answer the application questions in a Word document and complete the budget in the grants.gov budget format, and provide any other certifications and attachments that we ask you to provide. But we will work with you to get you those, and you complete those, and then we will upload them into grants.gov. So the local process, again, a September 27th deadline. It's integrated with CoC and YHDP. The non-conflicted funding review committee will review and score your projects with the objective criteria. We have a different scoring tool on the website for these projects because the criteria are just a bit different. We'll also be asking for project presentations, and we'll give you a time slot for these projects, half an hour time slot per agency. And again, the funding review committee will be looking to recommend a single project. Sort of as a separate process, H4H staff is going to consult with the local jurisdictions where your projects are located to verify whether what you're proposing is viable. We don't want to spend too much time on a project that just simply would not be approved by the local jurisdiction. We want a $5 million project that will be approved. So we'll be assessing that separately. And it's the projects that are viable, we'll ask you to present in person on October 8th or 9th. The policy board will make a final decision on October 15th, and we'll send out a letter on October 15th notifying you of the decision. And then again, the appeals period through October 23rd. And then after October 23rd, we'll be working closely with you to complete the HUD application, which is due November 21st. So there will be a bit of time to do the final narrative. Next slide. Here's the timeline. It's just a bit more detail. So actually, let me just stop here for a second. Okay, say you're the one selected project, and so you get a written notice of decision on 10/15 saying, yes, yay, we selected you, and you're moving forward. So we are going to want to see your complete draft of all of the narrative questions by November 8th. That'll give us time to review it and make comments. And then there will be a second draft due on November 15th, which should include all the changes that we request and corrections. And then basically the final deadline for us to submit the application in grants.gov is November 21st. Again, we're likely to submit it a couple of days ahead of time so as not to cause any problems. Next slide. All right, so we have a local application form that's posted and scoring criteria. And here's what the scoring criteria are. They closely mirror HUD's, the criteria HUD is going to use to nationally score projects to choose their 25 that get awards. So the reason they closely match HUD requirements or HUD scoring is because we want to bring forward a project which might get funded by HUD. So so here are basic categories and the points that we have associated with them in the local process. You can look at them, the most important one being experience in leveraging and coordination with housing, healthcare, and service providers. HUD's actually looking for projects which can demonstrate that you have other house, at least 25% of units are funded by like say other rental assistance, like not funded by this project, and that healthcare providers and service providers are committed to providing substantial amount of healthcare or other services for the clients. And so they're looking for commitments in those areas. So that's a significant scoring factor here. Rather than talking about each one, let's just go on to the next slide. Additional things that we're going to be looking at locally are, the viability as assessed by the local jurisdiction, the readiness and ability to meet HUD timeliness requirements, your ability and willingness to use the entire $5 million so that we maximize the opportunity, your ability and willingness to maximize the amount of the awards, 20% for project-based rental assistance and or for supportive services if that's what you really need. And then the number of units you're proposing to add with $5 million. Next slide. All right, the HUD application and scoring. So this is taken directly from CoC Build's NOFO. These are the categories HUD's going to rate when you submit your application, or we submit it for you through grants.gov. These are their scoring categories. And the maximum points for each one. So there are page limits per section. You cannot exceed them, or HUD will throw those pages away. And if you go into the CoC Build's NOFO, you'll see under each of these rating factors more detail about what they mean by each one. So really when you write the narrative, you'll be writing a Word document in 12-point font, 1-inch margins, single spaced. with heading, like there could be the heading development experience, leveraging. There might be some more text explaining what that is. And then you answer the question under that in no more than 5 pages. And so you should, this should be your basic outline for the narrative. That would be no more than 27 pages, except for the bonus points for environmental justice adds on more. And other attachments don't count toward the 27 pages. Like there's a required budget form that does not count. And other certifications and forms, like there's an SF 424 form, it's called, which is like information, your agency name and so on. That does not count. Next slide. So here's where the local materials are. Here's where to find the HUD CoC builds materials and my contact information. Again, if you want to set up an appointment with me to talk, email me first so that we can find a time that works. So with that, I think I'm done with the presentation. Are there questions, or Robert, do you want to add anything that I missed about what the county would like to see? Or
we'd really like to see many application ideas come in. And even if we don't select those projects, we want to move forward with as many permanent supportive housing ideas that can work as possible. So spread the word. One thing you mentioned, Tony, that I wanted some clarification on is the time frame for the funding.
right.
You said 2, 3, 4, or 5 years, but how does that relate to the operational subsidy time framing? Does that make sense?
Well, the operational subsidy time frame, that has to start within 3 months after construction is complete. So if it takes 3 years to build the project, then the operational funds would start then.
And the proposers could say we're setting aside $1 million for 12 months of.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that it's not entirely, whether, you can just ask for 1 month, or if it's going to be, 1 year or 2 years, it's not really clear. I'm hoping to find out more. I'm going to be looking more, possibly submitting a question about that. But what we would like to do is submit, project-based rental assistance for 1 million for 1 year. That would be ideal. If the project can use that much, I'm not sure. Then we would also want to include some supportive services for 1 year. But in any event, we want to maximize that.
There were a couple of questions in the chat, Tony.
Sure.
I think some of them are related to CoC build and some related to the prior presentation you did. So
Yeah.
I'll do the prior presentation question first, which is,
Okay.
do you know if eSnaps is up and running to start taking I haven't logged in myself, but David was wondering if you could log in and get the application started in eSnaps for this current notebook.
Actually, I haven't logged in yet to look. I do know that the HUD has posted the eSnaps guidance documents for new projects, renewal projects, and so on, and budgets. And so usually, it's probably up. I don't know. Yeah, I haven't looked. If not, it will be imminently.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then for the CoC builds, serving chronically homeless households, can the dedicated plus population also be included for CoC builds applications?
Yes. Technically, with CoC builds, the population doesn't have to be chronically homeless or dedicated plus. They just need to be homeless and disabled. But practically speaking, for our CoC, we would like to see, our neediest population. We're looking for housing for the most, chronically homeless and dedicated plus. I don't know, Robert, if you have more to say about that.
I actually don't know this, Tony, maybe you do. If there's more points we can get by saying in the application that we're targeting the chronically homeless individuals and dedicated plus, then my initial thought is, well, we should do that because we want to, this is a national competition. We're only applying with one application going forward. So we want to get as many points as possible. If there are no points associated with serving that specific population, I think it's to our local benefit to have some flexibility. Because when you require the HUD chronic homelessness, there's a lot of additional work and documentation. So if we don't get any benefit by saying that, then let's not lock ourselves into it.
Yeah, and you know, this is a brand new thing, and HUD's just kind of making it up as they go. The CoC builds NOFO and guidance materials they posted so far do not, you know, state that they're prioritizing chronically homeless and dedicated plus. And it does not appear that the scoring criteria favor those. But then again, so yeah, I would say we should stick with flexibility then. I mean, what HUD has said is homeless with disability. So, but it is important that, I mean, that being said, what HUD thinks of when they think of permanent supportive housing is a person who is so, you know, is disabled such that they need permanent supportive housing. And, you know, often that person's a chronically homeless person.
Although we would like to change that.
Right.
The folks don't have to be on the street for a year or longer.
Yeah. I mean, HUD has to recognize the project is serving, you know, a population that they want to serve. So,
yeah. I think those are all the chat questions. Yeah. One more thing that I wanted to emphasize, Tony, that you mentioned is that as CoC and county staff, wherever a project is proposed, we're going to make sure that there's no major issues in the local jurisdiction with that particular proposed site, whether that's zoning or planning or other issues that are concerned to our local government partners in the housing departments, because we don't want to move forward with an application on a project that our other public agency officials say, we are not going to support this project. And here's why. So just so those of you who are applying, we are going to do some behind the scenes checking before we submit an application to make sure the project we submit isn't going to bump up against city or even our own county level objections to the project. Now, there may be some from other sources, but we want to prevent that from happening at this stage in the process. Any other questions?
I think Richard posted. Oh, there are a whole bunch of questions actually.
We went through all of them.
We went through them. Okay, great. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, Tony, did you mention that your schedule and how you may have some odd times when you're available?
Yeah. So again, I am going to be out of the country for most of September, all of September, actually, when I think about it. I'm going to be 9 hours ahead. So, but I am going to be working. I'm going to be working on the applications, and I am available to answer your questions, but I just may be a little bit slower about answering then, or the answer might come at 2 in the morning, West Coast time.
So you're going to be on Asia time or Europe time?
Europe time.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. And so if you want to talk, I'll be available to talk, but we'll have to set a time that works for both of us. So I think like in the evening time for me, like if it were 7 o'clock in the evening for me, it would be 10, I think 10 in the morning for you. So we'll try to set a time like that.
I think that's it, right, Tony? Unless there's any more questions.
Thanks, guys. That was a
Thanks
really
for
good
all of your work.
presentation.
Yeah,
Much
thank
more
you.
informative than a lot of funder guidance we get. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you. Glad to hear that.
Thanks, Tony, for all of your support for us.
You're
on this
welcome.
process. And we'll have everything posted on the website, and folks reach out with questions as you're working on applications.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Hi, everybody.